become very popular in the drug literature is drug of abuse. That there are such things as drugs of abuse. Well, that's just a fancy way of saying a bad drug, one that you disapprove of. And the idea behind it is that anyone who uses such a substance is automatically an abuser. Well, that is a meaningless definition of drug abuse. I think that a useful definition of drug abuse, and one that I use, is that it's the use of any substance, whether it's legal or not, or approved or not, in such a way that it seriously threatens a person's health or their social or economic functioning in the world. If a use of a substance doesn't do that, in my mind, that is not abuse. There are many uses that people have put drugs to in the world. Everything from just recreation to having a good time to an excuse for social interaction. Look at the function of coffee and alcohol in our culture as providing excuses for people to relate to each other. Many people, if deprived of those drugs, would be unable to talk to other people. Having a coffee break is a legitimate excuse for stopping work and interacting with somebody. That's very parallel to uses of coca leaves in Indian cultures, to the use of khat, the leaf that I mentioned in the Middle East. That is a long tradition for use of psychoactive substances. In this culture, many people take psychoactive drugs to rebel, especially the disapproved drugs. That's something I think we have created by the attempts that we've made to control substances through prohibitions. That's one of the worst effects of drug prohibitions, is that they encourage people. First of all, I think they stimulate curiosity about drugs on the part of young people. The reason the age of experimentation with marijuana and other drugs has dropped so much in recent years is because we've made them forbidden and attractive. Many kids who would never care to try drugs do so only because we have made them prohibited. I have been consistently struck in my work with Indian tribes, especially in the Amazon, where drugs like coca leaf and psychedelics are available all the time but are used only by adults under certain circumstances. There are no laws or prohibitions governing that. That's just the way you do things in that society. I've been very struck at the total absence of curiosity on the part of children about those drugs. There's a tribe of Indians called Cubayos that I have lived with a lot on the eastern border of Colombia near Brazil in the Amazon basin, who use coca, powdered coca, as a daily stimulant and social drug, but it's mostly a drug of adult men. I have asked children in that tribe again and again, don't you want to know what coca is like? And they say no. And I said, well, don't you want to know what it does to you? And they say, well, we'll wait till we grow up. That's very different from anything I hear up here. And I think that is very much related to the absence of trying to deal with that through prohibitions and making things unavailable, and then trying to defend the prohibitions by greatly exaggerating the dangers of disapproved drugs while not acknowledging the dangers of the drugs that are in current use. The variants on good drug and bad drug are very frequent. You hear legitimate drugs, medical drugs, illicit drugs. I think the attempt to use names like entheogen is really another variant of that. It may be more benign, but it's a way of saying that our drugs, say especially the indoles and phenethylamines, are okay, but quaaludes and barbiturates and opiates aren't very good. You know, I just don't believe that. I think, and especially when you look at the uses of drugs for religious purposes or spiritual purposes, that is another very prominent theme in human culture. Another very common use in all cultures of psychoactive substances is to give people transcendent experiences, to allow them to transcend their human and ego boundaries, to feel greater contact with the supernatural or with the spiritual or with the divine, however they phrase it in their terms. And you may or may not approve of that, but it is a fact of human life. And the drugs that have been used for that purpose are very varied. There is no one category. There are many people who claim to have found God and spiritual life through alcohol. That's a very old tradition going back to ancient cultures. And it persists to this day in occasional people. There are people who say they have found God through opiates. There are people, and now, of course, the ones that we hear this most about are the ones that you will be hearing most about in this conference, which in the past have been called hallucinogens and psychedelics, and now entheogens. I don't think we can find a totally satisfactory name to them, because every name is either one put forward by the opponents of those drugs or the proponents of them, and it gets into the same kind of fight. But at any rate, this is a fact of human life. Now, it's also, of course, interesting that people have spiritual experiences through many other techniques that don't involve drugs at all. People do it through fasting, they do it through chanting, through praying, through associating with gurus, through attending organized religious pageants or procedures. It seems to me what all that suggests is that drugs don't have spiritual potentials. Human beings have spiritual potentials, and it may be that we need techniques to move us in that direction. And the use of psychoactive drugs clearly is one path that has helped many people. Now, because in our culture today, many of the drugs that people use for that purpose are disapproved drugs, that has led critics of that kind of use to complain that spiritual experiences obtained through drugs are not legitimate. Well, I think you could make that argument about any other technique that people use. I mean, why are spiritual experiences obtained through fasting not legitimate? I mean, legitimate and drug use not. It seems to me that the only test of whether spiritual experiences are legitimate are what effect they have on the person. I mean, if a person who has, who has never thought about the spiritual side of things until they've had a drug experience, then manifests spirituality in their life and pursues other sorts of spiritual activities, that seems to me that that was a genuine spiritual experience. If somebody just continues to take drugs over and over, maybe that was not a legitimate spiritual revelation. I don't think it has anything to do with the technique. I think it has to do with the person and the effect that technique has had on that person. I think that it's also clear that from the latest kinds of research that are going on that are very exciting in brain chemistry, suggests that the line between what is natural and what is not is very unclear, because it looks as if the brain makes analogs of most of the drugs that people use. I don't know that no one has found an analog of THC in marijuana at the moment, but the one that has, of course, received the most attention are the endorphins, the opiate analogs that our brains make. We clearly make our own stimulants in the form of neurotransmitters like dopamine and noradrenaline. We make our own downers in the form of chemicals like serotonin and GABA. We probably make our own antidepressants, possibly in the form of sex hormones. We make our own psychedelics, I am sure, almost certainly DMT, which is probably produced by the pineal, or if not it, something very close to it. I think we make all these things ourselves. Now, that raises a lot of interesting questions. Why is it that the human brain and plants should have the same chemicals in them? Why are the indoles and tryptamines so widely distributed in nature? DMT occurs, these indole drugs occur in everything from mushrooms to higher plants to the human brain. Why is that? Why are those chemicals so widely distributed? It may well be that when people have transcendent experiences by means of techniques like fasting and chanting and praying, that there is a final common pathway that's mediated through similar brain neurotransmitters. Maybe when people wake up feeling spontaneously high one day, their endorphin system is in high gear and they're not bothered by things that ordinarily would get them down. Maybe the people who are likely to become dependent on opiates are people who have a deficiency of endorphins, and so experience what the rest of us experience as the ordinary bothers of life as overwhelmingly painful. If that's the case, I would suspect that when you try to deal with that problem by taking an opiate from outside, you probably totally shut off your body's own production of those chemicals, and maybe that creates the biochemical basis for withdrawal and addiction. And if that's so, then the most useful approach to treating addiction would be to find ways of stimulating the body's own production of that chemical to solve the deficiency, not to supply it with an external analog of it. Well, this is clearly an important area of research that we'll hear a lot more about in future years. Also, it's amazing that it's not just natural drugs that appear to have analogs in the brain. We have now found a Valium receptor in the brain. What does that mean? Valium is a synthetic drug that was created in a laboratory. Were Valium receptors always there? Did people think up Valium because they had Valium receptors in their brains? Have Valium receptors evolved in response to use of Valium in the world? I don't know. It's a very interesting question. There is a PCP receptor that has just been found in the brain. What does that mean? This is a very interesting area of the interface between brain and the external world and drugs that may be the mediators of experiences. I think that also is further evidence that, you can't say that because a person has an experience in one way or another that one is legitimate and one is not. That's not the test. As I say, I think the only fair test is what effect it has on the person and what effect that person subsequently has on other people and the world. Now, this is all to do with the first lesson that I have learned from my studies, namely that there are no good drugs or bad drugs. The second thing that I have clearly learned is that the effects of drugs are as much dependent on expectation and